Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good whatever time of day it is. Thank you for tuning in to Conversations with Dr. Don. For your first time viewers, Conversations with Dr. Don is an ongoing series of 1 hour standalone talk shows where I interview interesting guests like you about who they are as one of a kind individuals and about whatever it is we have decided to talk about. And I'm so relaxed now I forgot my opening monologue because David Delk, my old friend here for many, many years, has got me so off kilter until I'm just not altogether here. I'm glad to have you on the show again, David, after it's been some time since you've been on before.
It has been. I'm very glad to be back.
How are you feeling now?
I'm feeling nervous, as I always am when I get in front of a camera.
I bet you're not more nervous than I am.
I bet I
am. It's going to be that kind of an evening. And the title of this evening's show is The Populist Dialogues, possessive, David Delk. And that Roman numeral 2 shows that this is the second time that David and I have talked about populist dialogues. And in the past we've talked about all sorts of other things, but never about populist dialogues. But we've got a few cheat sheet questions here that going to prompt us to keep us going in the right direction, because David has been doing this kind of stuff for some time, and his TV show Populist Dialogues has been going on for quite some time. But I wanted to have him to talk to him more at length about who he is, because when he has guests on, when he's hosting his show, he talks about what they're interested in, and he doesn't get as personal as I will with you as the evening wears on.
Right, yes. Yeah. As you know, the Populist Dialogues program I modeled after this program, except that I left the first half off.
Wait a minute now. That's the most important part. Because the purpose of this show is to show that ordinary people can be as interesting, and they are, as big names and celebrities. But you're a big name and celebrity now anyhow.
Well, I don't think that that's the case, but thank you.
All right. Shall we start with my trick question, or you want to save it for later?
Well, let's start with the trick question and get that over with.
If I were to ask your best friend, who is David, what would your best friend say? Be for the first person. David is what?
David is reserved, sincere, always active and doing something, and usually the something is either in the garden or having something to do with social or economic issues of the day.
In the garden. Are we going to talk about that later on?
We can talk about the garden now because it's spring.
Talk about the garden.
Right, yeah. So when my partner and I moved back into our house, the first thing we did, we had lived in the house. We left for 10 years. We came back, and the first thing we did when we came back is we covered all the grass up and got rid of it. And so we've got no grass except for a couple of ornamental grasses in the yard at all. And we planted a couple of big trees, and I've developed some landscaped garden areas. I have a little pond and the deck that I built 35 years ago in the house when I lived there the first time, and I really enjoy the time in the garden. I don't have enough time out there, but I've been out there already, been turning over the soil, planted lettuce and planted peas. And
already this year?
Already this year, yeah.
What about your fish?
I saw one of them swimming around. Of course, during the wintertime, they go down to the bottom, and you don't see them, but then in the spring, as the water warms up, well, then they start coming back up to the surface. And I saw one of them yesterday. So I know they're still there, still alive. Yeah.
Can any of the viewers come over and see your fish?
Probably not. They're just little small fish, because I admit that last year I accidentally killed all the fish that I had in there.
You didn't.
I did. I was trying to get rid of the algae, and instead I got rid of the fish. And I was really sad about that, because I had a couple of pretty good sized koi that I'd had for many years, and now I have these little fish, which will be growing into larger ones. But
yeah, I can tell you like your gardening.
I do.
And whenever you're showing people around those instances where you've got kind of an open house, then as you talk about your garden and what's going on out there, I can see the passion and the feelings in your voice. And your guests always appreciate your describing your garden so much for your garden.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and you're David, do you have a middle name?
I do.
Tell me what it is.
Eldon.
Eldon?
Uh-huh.
How do you spell that?
Eldon.
Where'd you get a name like that?
Well, this is a story. Are you sure?
We'll get to the topic before long.
Yeah, right. The Eldon was the middle name of the man who was listed on my birth certificate as being my father, although he wasn't my father. My mother divorced my father before my twin brother and I were born, and she didn't want to have his name on our birth certificates. So she lived in an apartment building close to downtown Portland and talked to this fellow that lived down the hall, and he said, yeah, you can list me as the father.
Isn't that an interesting story?
Yeah.
How's that affected you psychologically?
Not at all, I don't think.
Yeah, and you said you were born in Portland.
I was.
And anything significant about your racial or national or cultural heritage? Or you're plain old American white bread?
Yeah, pretty much that would describe me. My parents or my grandparents came from Germany, at least on my mother's side, and on my father's side, I'm not so sure about where they came from because I didn't know them, and that's about all I know about them. I don't really have any European identity in terms of wow, I'm German or whatever. I couldn't care less.
You got enough things to claim without all that.
Right.
How about a religious preference? Do you have one, or have you ever had one?
Well, my mother was Catholic, but luckily she didn't go to church, and I didn't go to church, and so I skipped all that. And I do go to church now, and I am a Unitarian. And the nice thing about Unitarians is you can believe in God, or you can not believe in God, or you can be mystified by the whole question. You don't have to have a creed or a set of beliefs that you have to believe in. They accept all beliefs or lack thereof. And so it's very comfortable for me.
Yeah. So how about any of those things you described about Unitarians? Do any of those fit you personally?
Yes, I someday will die, and then I'll know what comes after this.
I forgot to tell you, you can not answer a question or tell me get lost, and you've already done that, so.
No, that was an honest question, or answer.
Yeah. Your education, your formal education.
Yeah, I went to Lincoln High School here in Portland. I went to Shattuck Grade School, which is part of Portland State. And after I left, graduated from high school, I went to Portland State, and then got a bachelor's in sociology. And then I went to Eastern Washington State College for a short while. That's outside Spokane, in Washington, right? And started working on a master's in labor history, but I couldn't afford the expense, and so I had to drop out. And I had originally wanted to be a high school American Problems teacher. That was my goal, which I never have done.
So what did you become instead?
Well, I went to work for a stationery company. When I graduated from Portland State, originally I had to get a job. I had my teacher's certificate, but when I started college, there were lots of jobs teaching, and we were encouraged to go into teaching, and I wanted to do that, so I thought, great. But 4 years later, there was not a job to be found. And so I did get a job at a stationery company, and I worked in stationery and related fields for almost all of my work career.
Really?
Yep.
And are you working anymore now at a regular job?
No. No, I'm happy to say that I retired almost 2 years ago now, and haven't been happier. I love
Don't
it.
you miss going to work at regular hours, that kind of stuff?
Not at all. Not at all. Well, I have pretty regular hours, and my partner still is working, so on the weekdays, well, I generally get up right after he leaves.
After he leaves.
After he leaves, right? Yes, right. And so I'm always up by 8 o'clock in the morning, and I usually don't go to bed much before midnight. So.
How do you spend your days?
Oh wow. Well, a lot of it, unfortunately, is in front of a computer.
Computer.
Yeah, because as you know, I have the Populist Dialogues program, and I am the host, and I also do the editing of the program, and so that, between finding the guests for that program, and then doing the editing, each program I spend probably 8 hours doing the editing, and then there's getting the program down to the studio to be ingested into the studio so they can broadcast it, and then there's several other steps to, because the program is distributed to about 20 other stations around the nation, I have to get it into the right places and upload it on the internet and so forth. So all of that takes a lot of time.
Why don't you get smart like me? I have a guy who does my post-production work. Roger, where were you?
Yes, well,
and he helps me a whole bunch of the kind of stuff you're talking about,
Yes.
post-production,
Yes,
after we leave the studio.
Yeah.
And he's been wonderful.
Yeah, and of course Roger is present at when we record our Populist Dialogues program too.
He's just all over the place, isn't he?
He's a wonderful person, and I value him very highly.
Do you know what his nickname is?
Um,
Bonobo Roger. Call him that.
Oh, okay.
Bonobo Roger.
Okay, all right.
He's in the control room right now. We're aggravating him in there. So you spend a lot of time doing that, and the Populist Dialogues are just a delightful interview show that you do fairly regularly, and I invite you viewers to check it out. He does a good job talking to people about populist stuff and important things that you should be on board with. So you talked about your partner and your political persuasion. Are you a Tea Partier?
no.
Where are you in the
No.
political continuum? Left, right, or center, or what?
Well, I think the best way to answer that is to tell you why we called the TV program the Populist Dialogues.
Please do.
Yeah. My political leanings are influenced by my feeling that corporations in the United States and worldwide, of course, have far, far too much power. And they influence us in not only ways that we know, but in ways that we don't know. And the original populist movement was in the 1880s, and these dirt poor farmers in East Texas got together and they asked themselves, why are we so dirt poor? And they looked at the world around them and they said, well, it's because of the control that the banks and the railroads have over our lives. We can't get the credit from the banks at reasonable rates that we need to be successful. And when we do, and we do grow our crops, we can't get them to market because of the railroads. And so they very clearly identified the root causes of their misery in the corporate sector. And that's what, when we call Populist Dialogues, that's why we call that, is because we're trying to look at those root systemic causes for the corporate domination that we all experience.
Were those people populists?
Though they were populist, yes.
Yeah.
And the general focus of our guests are the same. They look at the world and identify problems primarily in terms of corporate power, how corporate power undermines democracy.
So populists look at life and existence in a broad sense, to get a sense of the reality of what's going on and the reasons for their situation in life.
Yes, right, yeah. And, in terms of the question about tea parties, uh, many of the original Tea Party people were also populists. Uh, Unfortunately, the Tea Party has been primarily taken over by big money interests. And so while a lot of Tea Party members or those who identify with the Tea Party would still say that they're populists, the direction of the Tea Party movement has been in the direction of
Embracing the
embracing
ultra-conservative
corporate
thinking,
power and
neoliberal.
yeah, exactly right, yeah. And so I don't identify as a Tea Party person, but I do feel some kinship with some of them in terms of what they're
So do
particularly at the beginning of the movement.
So you're not even a right winger.
Oh no! And then for so many Tea Party people and right wingers, being in favor of some of the social things that I am, for instance, gay marriage, that doesn't usually register as a positive for Tea Party folks and right wingers. So
Yeah.
right.
How about memberships in political, social, or civic organizations? Do you hold any memberships you'd like to share with the viewers?
Well, let's see. I am the president of the East Side Democratic Club, which is not associated with the Democratic Party. I always need
Why
to
does
say
it
that.
have the name Democratic in its title?
Actually, we talked about changing the name so that instead of being a capital D, it would be a little d, to note that that we believe in having democratic, broad-based discussions of issues, and that we forum in order to reinforce democratic principles, but not the Democratic Party.
Yeah, and your position in that organization?
So I just became president a few months ago.
President, you
Yeah.
have more credentials than I can shake a stick at. What about your other offices?
Yeah, well, the main one that I'm connected with is the Alliance for Democracy,
The national organization?
both the national and the Portland chapter. And I'm the president of the Portland chapter, and I'm national co-chair of the national organization. And the mission of the Alliance for Democracy is to end corporate domination, establish true democracy, create a just society based on a sustainable, equitable economy. So it's very broad-based, but it's very, the primary things that we work on are things which enhance democracy and democratic processes, and diminishing the corporate power that tends to squash democratic processes.
You know, you've got it down pretty good. I'd lose it somewhere along the way and have to go to my notes. And I've experienced you in those positions and those positions of responsibility, and you've addressed groups of people and crowds and like that. And you do just a wonderful job. Your whole way of being, your gentleness, in addition to your intellect, presents a fine image to imitate or to use as a model. You do a wonderful job. You're often doing things at a Unitarian church here in Portland, and when it's over, you'll ask me, how did I do? In a kind of nice way. Of course, how did you do? You always do fine.
Well, I always do wonder. I don't think I do. So
Yeah.
it's always nice
And
to
I'm not
hear that.
sucking up to you
Right,
this
yeah.
time, anyhow.
Right, yeah. So talking about the Unitarian Church, I'm also a member of the Economic Justice Action Group at the church. And that group started as a way for the Unitarian Church to be involved with the battle for what became the Battle for Seattle in probably 1999, when the WTO was having their worldwide meeting in Seattle, and people came together across the country, across the nation, that's the same across the world, to Seattle to protest the policies of the WTO.
World Trade Organization.
Right.
Well, I thought you were a big supporter of that.
No.
Right. Any persons alive today or from the past that you particularly admire or admired? That any names come to mind for you?
Well, one of them is Lloyd Marbett. And Lloyd Marbett, you know Lloyd Marbett.
Yeah, but my viewers don't.
Yeah. So Lloyd Marbett he's right about my age, and he was heavily involved as a chief petitioner in initiative campaigns to close the Trojan nuclear plant. That's where I first saw his name. I didn't know him at the time, and there were multiple efforts. All of them were unsuccessful, but ultimately, Portland General Electric, that owned the Trojan nuclear plant, had to close it down because the pipes were busting. Rather dangerous situation. So I know him from that.
And he was instrumental in getting it closed. Huh?
Yes, yeah, he really was, and keeping up the drumbeat, questioning nuclear power, and at that time, Washington State had Dixie Lee Ray as their governor. And what was she known as? She was known as, I can't remember the phrasing, but it was she was like Ms. Nuclear Power. And Washington State had a plan for building 7 nuclear plants.
So she was pro-nuclear power.
She was very pro-nuclear power, and eventually Washington State backed out of building all except for one of those plants, which still operates at Hanford, called the Columbia Generating Station. And Lloyd Marbett continues to oppose that. And he's been a very strong voice for cleaning up Hanford, which is the most polluted, contaminated site in the nation.
Yes.
And then where I first met him was actually working on measures 46 and 47 here in Oregon, which are the two measures for campaign finance reform. And he was involved in that initial planning and working on the wording and everything that goes into a campaign from the very beginning, and I was too, and that was the first time I met Lloyd, and we've become pretty good friends since then.
Does he know that you feel this way about him, that you admire him that much?
I don't know. I hope he does. I hope he does, right, yeah.
Google Lloyd Marbett. He's a marvelous, delightful human being. He's been on the show a number of times in the past, and he'll be on again in the future, I'm sure. He's quite a human being.
Yes. In fact, he and I have been on the show together.
Yeah.
Right, yes. And,
your memory's better than mine.
Yeah. Well, and I know that when he and I have been on together, he's extremely verbal. He has the voice. He really does have the voice of God.
Baritone.
It's a rich baritone, and I know it was hard for me to say much. Well,
it's hard for anybody to say much when Marbett is in the picture.
Right. Yeah. Right.
But he's an absolute
But
delight.
he's absolutely a dedicated populist.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, personification of populism.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody else? Any other names come to mind for you from history or from the past, or pre-biblical or whatever?
Well, one other is Don Baham.
Get out of here.
Seriously. Actually, yes. Because a lot of what I do now, particularly with regard to the Populist Dialogues, is because I know you. And because you invited me to guest host for you and to be a guest on the program. And I found that I really enjoyed being a guest. And so you had a big influence on my life because I enjoyed doing that work.
Boy, I don't know what to say.
There you go.
If I say something, I'll probably screw it up, so let's leave it alone.
Okay, all right.
All right, let us take a break, and then we'll come back and talk more about the subject of the show. Mr. Director, break time coming up. Okay, we're back. Thanks for staying tuned, and I'm sure having a good time with my friend David. I hope you are enjoying us. And for your first-time viewers, Conversations with Dr. Don is an ongoing series of one-hour standalone talk shows where I interview interesting people like most of you out there and David Delk about who they are as unique, one-of-a-kind individuals. And whatever it is we decided to talk about. And I said that because some of you tuned in later, you were goofing along, you stumbled across the show and you didn't know what you were watching. So that's what you're watching. So let's pick up and start talking about things that David and I think you need to be aware of. The Alliance for Democracy, Populist Dialogues moved to amend Trans-Pacific Partnership, and a few more things. And shall we start off with you talking about the Alliance for Democracy first?
Okay. Well, yeah. Well, we did a little bit already.
Yes, sure.
But the Alliance for Democracy is a national organization dedicated to ending corporate domination. That's our primary thing. That's what we work on. And of course, that's a broad area, so it gets expressed in a number of different campaigns. And each of the various chapters works on whatever it is they work on. But here in Portland and in Oregon, we have worked on campaign finance reform, limiting money in politics. We've worked on public funding of elections. Now we're working on advocating for a constitutional amendment that would say corporations are not people and money is not speech. Because the U.S. Supreme Court has issued a whole series of court decisions which have said that corporations actually have our human constitutional rights.
How can that be? From my meager understanding of the Constitution, how can the Supreme Court say that money is speech and corporations are persons? How can they do that?
Yeah, well, they don't need to have any justification for doing it. They just get to do it. That's why they're supreme. And of course, the fact that they're supreme is something that they assumed for themselves way back in the time of Madison. Prior to there was a case called Madison versus Mulberry, and in that case, I can't remember exactly what the details were, but the Supreme Court said that they were the ones who ultimately get to decide, and essentially they took that away from Congress and said that they would be the final reviewers of congressional acts as to its constitutionality, and because of the peculiarities of that decision and what led up to it, President Madison was forced to accept that, and unfortunately there wasn't much in the way of opposition to it at the time. At the same time, the Supreme Court didn't use that authority that it had given itself for about 50 years until there was a case called Santa Clara County versus the Southern Pacific Railroad. This was in 1886. 1886, and the Supreme Court was at that point said that corporations had 14th Amendment rights, and of course 14th Amendment was one of the three amendments which was enacted after the Civil War, and specifically it said that all citizens had due process and equal protection of the law, both at the federal level and at the state level. And so this court decision said that corporations, because they were people, also had 14th Amendment rights.
Corporations are people?
That's what they said. And that's the reaction that most people have when they hear that, but that is actually what the Supreme Court has said. And they have reaffirmed it and reaffirmed it and reaffirmed it. So there's this whole structure of case decisions now that affirm that. And so the only way that we can overturn that is through a constitutional amendment that in fact says, no, corporations are not people, they do not have our constitutional rights, And that's the way that should be.
Well, then the Supreme Court will say your amendment is wrong. We won't accept it. It violates the Constitution. This agreement that we have a co-equal system of government in America.
Yeah. Well, the Supreme Court won't actually be able to do that because the Constitution is the basis for them making the decision. So if we put something in the Constitution which changes it and says that corporations are not people, they're just not going to be able to use that rationale for making decisions in the future. We hope. That's our theory. That's what we're working on. And and there is a serious question that the Supreme Court could simply ignore it. But then the fact that it was operating in a illegitimate manner would be so clear to everybody that I don't think that they would do that. Time will tell.
What about a rewriting of the Constitution? Should we rewrite the Constitution? Isn't it sort of outdated?
Well, yeah, actually, Jefferson said that we should review the Constitution every 20 years.
Every 20 years?
Yeah.
Oh, I remember that. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And so there is a tradition of thinking that says that we should, and we have, in fact, on average, passed an amendment every 20 years. But it's been a long time now since we've done that, and we're well overdue. And this 28th Amendment that we're advocating for now, to end corporate personhood and the doctrine that money is speech, might be the one to do that again. But in terms of other things that we should be reviewing in the Constitution, the Interstate Commerce Clause would be one that would be good to look at. And there are other things in the Constitution which would be nice to look at, but
okay, we can pursue
yeah, that could be a whole other topic, a whole other
But
program.
the Alliance for Democracy is, I'm familiar with, and I belong to a number of organizations, probably 25 or 30, and the Alliance for Democracy is excellent as far as populist issues and real democracy is concerned. And their newsletters and their publications are just really right on, not because I'm a member of the Alliance for Democracy and the local chapter too. So, shall we continue on?
Yeah, let's continue on.
This Populist Dialogues, I want to say a little more about that and the people you have on, and you pursue one or two subjects pretty thoroughly in the half an hour of your show. You want to say a few more words about Populist Dialogues?
Yeah.
How'd that come about, Populist Dialogues?
Well, I enjoyed guest hosting for you, and I thought that would be something where we could really take that mission of the Alliance for Democracy and actually make a program that was focused on doing those things. And of course, the mission is very broad, and so it's relatively easy. And Portland is got a lot of people that are very good as being advocates and are concerned about corporate domination and are advocates for democracy. So it's relatively easy to find good people to have as guests. So that's what we do. We have generally one or two guests. We have one topic on each program, and we talk about those for half an hour, and then we air it.
At the risk of offending some past guests, can you think of one or two particular interviews that come to mind now that you particularly enjoyed or found rewarding in any way?
Yeah, there is a political scientist named Robin Hunnell who has done really good. He was originally from American University and then has moved to Portland, and I think he's now actually retired. But he's the ideal guest for me because I really don't like to do the talking. I really want the guest to do the talking and tell us what they have to say. And he being a professor, you ask the first question, then he goes for the half hour. So but that's not the reason why I like him. I mean, he has insightful things to say. And then Lloyd Marbett has been a guest a couple of times, and he's talked about nuclear problems, Hanford and Fukushima, and that disaster that's ongoing, that even though we don't hear much about it. Dan Meek, who is a Portland attorney. I think you've had him on your show.
He's coming on again next month too.
Oh,
We
okay,
love
that's
Dan
what they are.
Meek,
Great,
yeah.
yeah. And there's a political science professor at Pacific University named Jules Boykoff,
I've had him on too.
who was a delightful person.
Uh-huh.
And I've always enjoyed having him on. My most recent programs, recorded 2 programs last week, last Sunday. One of them is with Ryan Rittenhouse. He's with Friends of the Columbia Gorge, and we were talking about coal trains and coal exports and why that's a problem, and also we talked about oil trains. And then who was my other guest? Well, let's not. My memory is failing me at the moment.
I have a,
Two producers of a new documentary called The Healthcare Movie.
Uh-huh.
And they live in Salem. And they produced this wonderful movie, which will be airing here at the Unitarian Church later in April, called The Healthcare Movie, about the differences and the origins of the difference between the American health insurance system
insurance system, versus healthcare system.
Versus the Canadian health care system, and how we get to the Canadian position.
Time is slipping by, so we better keep moving along. Move to amend. You said a little about that. Do you want to say a little more about it, or shall we move on?
Let's just talk about that for a minute. Move to Amend is a national organization, and actually it's an organization which the Alliance for Democracy was one of the co-founding organizations with it, and it started immediately after the Citizens United Supreme Court decision that said, again, that because corporations are people, that we can't restrict the corporation's right to free speech, and therefore they release corporations to actually spend money in candidate or so-called independent campaigns for electing candidates to office. So Move to Amend immediately sprung up saying we need to amend the Constitution. Right, and so that's the move to amend the Constitution to eliminate corporate personhood and money of speech. And there were a number of organizations which sprung up at the same time. But Move to Amend was the only one that wants to go all the way. Some of the other organizations that sprung up at the time said, let's just go back to the world that existed before Citizens United. Well, the system was corrupt then, so why go back just that part way? Let's get to the root of the problem, which is the Supreme Court decisions, and say that the Supreme Court just can't make those kind of decisions anymore.
How is the movement going?
Well, actually, we've been rather successful. So far, we're not ready to amend the Constitution yet, but we're building. We've had, there's probably 400 communities around the nation that have supported amending the Constitution through resolutions or ballot measures. In Oregon, we had ballot measures in 4 cities in the last November election. Most recently.
Yes.
Anyway, in Corvallis, Eugene, Ashland, and Lincoln County, all of those were approved by more than 75%. We worked with the Oregon legislature, and we got the Oregon legislature to pass a resolution calling for an amendment to the Constitution, and we're going to move on so that hopefully we will have a ballot measure on the ballot in November of 2016 asking all of us here in Oregon to vote should we amend the Constitution.
Hey, wow, that's exciting. That's going to be quite a challenge and quite interesting to see what the corporations are going to do with money as free speech to counteract the citizens' efforts to take back our country.
Right, yeah. And unfortunately, citizens may be even more upset by that time because the U.S. Supreme Court now is set to release a new decision. It could be coming down almost, even within the next month, called McCutcheon versus the FEC. And McCutcheon is a wealthy Alabama business person, Republican, who said that the aggregate limits on campaign contributions that apply to an individual giving direct to candidates was was non-constitutional infringement on his freedom of speech. And so currently an aggregate limit exists, which is at about $123,000, more, much higher than the average income of Americans. And he felt that that was an unconstitutional infringement on his right to free speech, and he would remove that if the Supreme Court does that. I've seen various estimates on what the new ability would be for giving, but if you added up all of the federal races around the nation and gave up to the limit in those races, then the aggregate limit then would now become millions of dollars.
Oh, would you give that much money of your personal wealth to the campaign?
Well, there are people out there that would.
Oh my goodness.
They most definitely would. Right.
We better move on because we haven't gotten through the Trans-Pacific Partnership,
right.
TPP.
Okay.
I want to hear about that.
Okay. All right. Let's talk about the Trans-Pacific Partnership. So the Trans-Pacific Partnership is another NAFTA style, the North America Free Trade Agreement style free trade, or what I call corporate trade agreement, which Obama has been negotiating for 4 years in secret. And so most of our viewers probably will not have heard of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or the TPP. In negotiating this, well, first of all, let's go back to when Obama was first running for office. When he ran for office, one of the things that he talked about was the need to renegotiate NAFTA and other free trade agreements that we've signed since then.
Let me interrupt you.
Sure.
Will you go back just a little bit about NAFTA, because there are some viewers who are not as sophisticated as many of them are.
Oh, okay.
Just a few words about NAFTA,
Yeah.
if you will.
NAFTA is the North America Free Trade Agreement. It was it was actually the second trade agreement that the United States entered into that it really involved much more than traditional trade issues of quotas and tariffs. And so it in particular had a chapter in it called Chapter 11, and it allowed corporations, multinational corporations, to sue a government if the government had passed a law which affected its ability to make a profit, to make future profits, actually. And so for the first time, corporations, because they were able to sue a government directly, actually elevated the corporation to the same status as the nation itself.
Wow.
Yeah. And in the WTO, the World Trade Organization, which preceded NAFTA, it had allowed corporations to sue, to also sue, but in order to sue, they had to persuade their national government to press the case. So the corporation couldn't do it themselves. But with NAFTA, corporations could do it themselves. And just to give you an example, one example of what it means, in California, California banned the use of a chemical called MTBE. It was a gasoline additive, and it was known to be a carcinogen. And when it gets into water, it has this turpentine smell. So all of a sudden, water around the state was beginning to smell like turpentine, and the state of California banned it. And a Canadian manufacturer of a component of MTBE sued in a private trade tribunal, sued the American federal government for damages. And there's a number of interesting things here. One, if this Canadian manufacturer had actually been an American manufacturer, it would not have been able to sue.
Right.
Okay, so that was the first thing, is that these agreements and these chapters create uneven playing fields which favor multinational corporations over domestic corporations. The other thing that's really important to talk about is that California, which actually passed the law, doesn't get to go to the court and defend itself. The federal government has to do that, and the federal government is the one that has to pay the damages if the case is settled in favor of the complainant.
Where does the federal government get the money from?
From our taxes, of course.
Oh, yes.
Right. Yes. Right. Yeah. And so, actually, there have been. Let me just look here. There have been $14 billion. There are $14 billion worth of pending cases now, just under NAFTA.
Pending.
Pending. Yeah. Right. Yeah. $360 million in NAFTA claims have already been paid. And there has been $405 million paid in 13 cases, just 13 cases.
So ordinary citizens like us, bottom line, are paying the multinational corporations
to overturn our laws.
Jeez. Okay, I've never heard it put so clearly.
Yeah, and the Trans-Pacific, moving back to the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the Trans-Pacific Partnership is being negotiated with 12 Pacific Rim nations, including Canada, the United States, Mexico, Japan, Malaysia, Australia, New Zealand, Chile, and some others.
Vietnam. Those nations.
Vietnam, and there's a couple more I've forgotten there. But in those nations, there are 14,000 foreign corporations that actually have subsidiaries working in the United States. So with this Chapter 11 style investor protection clause, those 14,000 foreign corporations could sue our laws, to challenge our laws.
And they've been doing it successfully.
In the past, but not with the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Not yet.
Not yet.
Right,
it's on fast track too, huh?
Yeah. Now, fast track is something which the president has asked for, and he's asked Congress for it. And what it does is, instead of the usual process of getting approval for legislation, it says that, number one, it gives the president authority to negotiate the trade agreement. Of course, he's been doing it all this time. But it finally authorizes him actually to do that. And it says that, President, you can actually sign the agreement prior to presenting it to us. So no other time, no other kind of agreement does the president get to sign the legislation before Congress approves it.
So with this system, he's no longer the president. Is he a czar or a dictator or what?
It's getting close. It's getting iffy.
Okay,
And so then fast track also says that Congress will have limited debate time, will have a limited time to consider, 90 days to actually consider the agreement, and then they have to vote either yes or no. They cannot make any amendments, no changes to it whatsoever.
We got 5 or 6 minutes left.
Yeah, and at the same time that the president is negotiating the Trans-Pacific Partnership, he has now also started to negotiate an agreement with the European Union. And talking about the 14,000 TPP corporations that have subsidiaries in the United States, transatlantic European Union companies have 24,000 subsidiaries in the United States, all of which could sue us for changes in our law which impinge on their ability to make future profits.
Is there any existing system from the past come to mind now, feudalism, or what's going on here? It seems like the super rich are getting more and more power, and you and I, ordinary citizens, are becoming less and less powerful, having less really concern or effect on our life, the quality of our life.
Yeah. And democracy works best when it's local, when it gets as small as possible, and we realize that we need to have larger structures, but these agreements impinge totally on the ability to make local decisions. And one of the things right now, of course, is being talked about is GMO labeling, genetically modified organisms labeling. But these agreements, the TPP, has specific language in it that would prevent labeling.
And why is it that they want to prevent labeling?
Well, because people don't want to eat food that's been genetically modified. So if you prevent people from having, or if you prevent a label from being put on the food, well, people don't know what they're eating. And
well, don't you trust science and the corporations for giving us healthy stuff that won't interfere with our life and our existence?
See, you've been listening to me for an hour. What do you think? How do you think?
You're so transparent. Occasionally, Fox News will slip into my conversation.
Right. Yes. Right. Yeah.
So, Trans-Pacific Partnership is not a good idea.
It is not, and so we really recommend that everybody call your U.S. representatives and your senators and tell them that you don't support the Trans-Pacific Partnership, you don't support free trade agreements that are based on the NAFTA model, and that they should vote no. And more specifically, right now, they should vote no on fast-track authority for the president. Now, I think we're almost out, but I could continue.
We've got a couple more minutes.
Okay, yeah. Democrats, the fast-track authority which the president presented or to Congress, which is before Congress now, is pretty much dead in the water. But there are Democrats, particularly, who would like to vote for fast-track authority, and they're working on ways of enticing people to actually vote for a modified fast-track authority. And I would only say that anytime you restrict Congress's ability to have full debate and prevent them from amending legislation, you need to say no. And it doesn't make any difference what window dressings you put on it, you still need to say no.
What's happening to our country overall with what's going on now? I'm thinking about Obama's performance to date so far as our president. What kind of a grade would you give him overall, and what's your opinion about his leadership to date?
I think he's a great leader. I feel like I feel like his instincts are good, but he comes under tremendous amount of pressure to do otherwise. And I feel like he's just been such a disappointment. The people that voted for hope have just been disappointed.
Because of the corporate influence or control of the...
Well, it's the corporate control.
Class
It's
warfare.
also, yeah, and it's also because of who he put in place into his cabinet, who he put into place as his advisors. They were all corporate types.
Why do you do that? He talks like a populist, but he doesn't walk the walk of a top.
Right, yeah, and one of the things on his first election he talked about was how he had gotten all the grassroots support and all these small donations, and that was true. He got more small donations than anybody had ever had, but he also got a tremendous amount of support from Wall Street and from Hollywood, and from pharmaceutical companies.
Okay, I can tell you love our president. We better let it go for that right now. Yeah. You have a final words in the last 10 seconds or so for our viewers, a message you have for them. Just look at the camera and tell them what you think.
I think that we all need to be very aware that corporations do what's in their interest, not in ours. We always need to be very skeptical of their proposals, specifically on the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Call your U.S. senators, call your U.S. representatives, tell them that you oppose these agreements, and that you want them to vote no, and that you don't want them to give the president fast-track authority.
Oh, I thank you now. We got time for a couple of PSAs. To get my show, local broadcast schedule, go to my website and click on present day activities. And one more PSA, my shows are on the web at my website again. Click on favorite links. And we have one more. The ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union. There are some people who don't like the ACLU anymore, but I love the ACLU. I've been a member now for 40 years. Learned about the ACLU. Our civil liberties are almost in the tubes right now, so let's support the American Civil Liberties Union to protect our civil liberties. And to end corporate personhood, you'll like that one. Go to move2amend.org. Please go to move2amend.org and learn how you can help end corporate personhood.
And sign the petition that's on the site.
Sign the petition, yes. Thanks for watching, and remember, KFC, not Kentucky Fried Chicken, Dr. Don's KFC. Kind, friendly, and charitable. Be kind, be friendly, and be charitable to you too. And you too, and you too, and you too, nurse. Thanks again for watching. Good night until next time.
Yeah, okay.